some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Just another day closer to my PP badge.
Two. Check. Check 2. What's up? What's up, folks? That was a slow stare down. I'm late getting started. Okay, so here's my question. We're here. I'm seeing some comments about slow mode going on here. I'm seeing slow mode. A couple moments ago. I don't want to name any names here, but I'm going to. Left Hand Stew has gone rogue. Left Hand Stew going rogue here. It says Left Hand Stew cleared chat for non-moderators. Enabled 1 month followers only mode. Enabled 30-second slow mode. What's going on with that? What's up? What's happening? We're in lockdown mode. But why? But why? I'm so confused. I'm so confused. The authoritarian left strikes again. There's a fancy shield button. Okay. But do we need this? Do we need slow mode? Do we need slow mode? Do we need shield mode? Is it to defend against like possible like some kind of intrusions? Johnny, thank you for the 10 months of tier 1. Thank you, Johnny. Happy to have you in the community. Thank you. Another day closer to the exclusive elite TRRS 24-month sub badge. Only another 14 months to go. It's gonna go quickly, Johnny. It's gonna go quickly. Okay, what is going on? This is a bad time for a mod revolt here. This is a bad time for a mods going rogue. Jeez. Stu, it's in slow mode. That's right. Oh my goodness. This is outrageous. This is fucking outrageous. So hello everyone, thanks for joining the stream. So I got VIJAY Prashad coming on the show 45 minutes. 3 p.m. Obviously, Disco Stew does not advertise. Thank you, Quinn. Usually start the stream at noon, of course, but today my kid did not have school. And not because there's like an insane amount of snow in Montreal. It wasn't because of that. He just had a day off. He just had a day off school, which I didn't realize, of course, until yesterday evening. So I spent the first part of the day just like hanging out with him, taking care of him. So I had to postpone the beginning of the show. So I'm going to go a little bit later. We're starting at 2, so we're going to go to, around 5:36 or so. And we got VIJAY in 45 minutes. And I did not prepare. I did not prepare at all. I'm kind of hoping to cram. And maybe I can put some kind of a video on in front of you folks. And scribble down some questions before we get started. Way to schedule the big day wrong. That's right. That's what I did do. Yes, I did. Teachers wheeling at the CRTV. That's right. That's correct. Don't forget to ask about beverages, Avatar: The Way of Water, Gaucho, of course. It's been a bad morning. I had some reply guy telling me Stalin was buddy-buddy with Adolf Hitler. A lot of Stalin haters posting their L's lately. Couldn't be me, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending on who you are. I've been Stalin posting on Maine. God help me. I don't know what came over me, but we've been talking about the big man lately. We've been talking about him. So, you know, I saw that there's some discourse. I saw there was some discourse about this, and I said, why not throw my hat in the ring and post the your grandfather deserved it guy. Wide Stalin, the Sigma Stalin lover. As with the legacy of Joey Steele. Actually, I hate Stalin for money arc coming in around 9 months. This is after my stream 8 months from now. After my stream 8 months from now, when I denounce Stalin and Mao and the entire legacy of Marxism Leninism, and I say I was wrong, and I've grown now. I was wrong, and I've grown up, and I don't believe that stuff anymore.
Freddie Quimby was with me the entire night in question. We were collecting canned goods for the starving people in one of them loser countries. Well, that's clear.
I'll go back to the beginning, actually. And in retrospect, I regret ever saying anything positive about Stalin. I no longer support the Soviet Union or uphold socialism in any way.
Clearly innocent.
Oh, good. My laundry is done. It's done.
Oh. Classic. Enjoy the view of the Lenin bus now. Exactly. It's going to be out of here. It's going to be out of here soon enough. I'm transitioning. I'm going to become a 4-digit viewer streamer. I'm leaving you suckers behind. Okay? I'm leaving you suckers behind. For anyone, that's the thing. For anyone that like is one of the haters and losers that's in the Rob Rousseau hater club, you know. If you ever want to think of me like a grifter or like one of these like Twitch streamer, like yeah, just trying to talk about things that are popular in order to make money. That's exactly why I got involved in the extremely lucrative grift of, you know, using my real name and identity to say sometimes the things that Stalin did weren't that bad, frankly. That's the extremely lucrative grift of promoting or acting as a Stalin apologist under your real name and identity verified on social media. Very lucrative thing to do. You have to very incrementally become a trot and play the long game. That's how you do it. That's right. I have a flawless sensibility of who online is normal and who's not. I'm happy to report that Rob is actually normal. Thank you, G. Kleppy. Thank you. Thank you. Stalin posting really grabs the widest possible audience. Like, really, it's so shocking that CBC hasn't come fucking knocking down my door, or global news, or any of the few media companies in this country. Strangely, they haven't reached out to me about, you know, using my online platform to go on their networks. I don't know what's wrong. I don't know what they're waiting for. I just don't know what they're waiting for. Carrier Wave, I must admit, I enjoy the vendetta that you're on now. Going after the extreme hatred you have for leftist streamers. I always get, every time I see one of those posts from you, I'm always like, no. But I'm glad to know that you're still here and that I don't count. I don't count as being, like you were saying, this is more of like a beverage discussion and classic rock appreciation group. So we're enjoying Carrier Wave's Choosing Violence arc. Yes, we are. It's food chat with the Juche characteristics. Okay, good. Not a politics stream. It's just a chatting stream. That's right. It's a bird watching video, specifically geese. Definitely. Okay. So we have VIJAY Prashad coming on in a few minutes. I maybe just wanted to take a look. I know Lodane, and thank you for the raid, Lodane, by the way, and thank you for holding it down. I at the very last moment indicated that I was not going to be able to start at the right normal time, so I appreciate you carrying the pre-show on your back for like 2 hours longer than expected. So I know you rewatched some of the VIJAY interview, but maybe I can just throw that on specifically because we're like, I think getting into the conversation is really going to be talking about Ukraine and Putin and that kind of stuff, and I think that's probably a good place to start the discussion. So maybe we could just take a look at where we were at 1 year ago today, or just about 1 year ago today. Take a look at where we were at, and that's going to be a launching point to, I think, get into the discussion about what has changed, what has happened in the last year. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
TRRS MRX.
You know what would be, Emily, you know what would be a good Avatar 2 question is, number one, has he seen it? And number two, you know what, actually I'm going to save it. I'm going to save the question to surprise you, so you'll be surprised and delighted. Are you going to ask him to see it with you? I could do that. I could do that. If he hasn't seen it, the question is, what the fuck is the matter with you? Because it just immediately angrily end the interview. Immediately and angrily end the interview. So let's take a look at some of this, okay? Let's take a look at some of this last year's conversation with VIJAY. See where he was at. Cut his mic. That's right. So yeah, let's put that on, and I will quickly scroll down a couple more questions. I feel comfortable enough since I talk about this shit all the time that I can just like have a conversation with VIJAY, and I think I kind of feel okay about that. But I would like to just oh, thanks, Lodane. I would like to just scroll down a few questions in case I get anxious or something. So let's check. Yeah, so they got the COP26 comments at the beginning, and then you have the stuff about Putin and the Cold War and stuff, which is really interesting. So let's see some of this. You might see some of you make appearances in this video. Okay. Told my audience, I was very clear.
By the way, can I close my video?
No.
Hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah.
I know get away with crushing the dreams of ordinary people in places like Cabo Delgado. And he said something to me that he's trying not to be a jerk. So he says, Latin America, this is the attitude. And I think people around the world, I'm not talking about like right-wing governments. I'm just talking about ordinary. Like, you got to give up, how they talk. It's not just Trump who used to wag his finger. Obama also wagged his finger a lot. People remember Obama.
Somehow you look younger now. Yes, I do. Asking about the hows and the whys. The most important question. Where does the Putin stuff start? This is what I don't
why
remember.
He's right. He said no nuclear weapons country invaded another country since World War II. Do you know why Biden is right? It actually reveals the mentality of the US ruling class.
Let's go back here. We'll start here.
Biden's speech himself, or press conference, he lied about just this thing. He said, firstly, Putin, again, wagging finger, Putin, don't behave badly.
I think I picked that up from VIJAY. I think I picked that up from him, like inadvertently, the finger wagging lectures from the West. I love that. It's such an accurate way of describing, how we talk down to people in the global South, the third world, how we talk down to activists, the finger wagging lectures.
He said that, can you imagine if a country with nuclear weapons invades another country? He said it hasn't happened since World War II.
I was like, noticed that. Yeah.
What the flip are you saying, Joe? You authorized the war in Iraq. And let me explain why he's right. He said no country invaded.
The only reason I didn't retweet your extremely sick meme, Lodane, was because you're saying I was starting at noon, which was not accurate. And I didn't want to spread misinformation. But the meme is fucking incredible, though. VIJAY retweeted that one and not mine. Not my post. What's up with that? Maybe Lodane should just host the show. Maybe Lodane should just do the interview. How about that?
No nuclear weapons country invaded another country since World War II. Do you know why Biden is right? It actually reveals the mentality of the US ruling class.
I thought we were bros, but now I'm not so sure.
Or invade Iraq or invade Libya, they don't think they're invading. They think there's a global Monroe Doctrine that the United States can do anything it wants, anywhere it wants. And that no country actually has sovereignty, let alone countries like Iraq and so on. They're not actually invading Iraq. They are just exercising the US global Monroe Doctrine. We can come and do whatever the hell we want in your country. So, yeah, it's BS when he says no nuclear country since World War II has invaded another. Of course you have. You invaded Iraq 2003 at least. Forget all the others.
Yes.
That's A. But B, it actually tells you what they really think. They really think these, what did Trump call them? Shithole countries don't have sovereignty and we can do anything we want.
It was the camera and the shaving.
To the list, Ukraine, which is why that bloody pseudo-puppet president of Ukraine is now saying, please guys, dial it back.
Yeah,
okay,
stop this.
We miscalculated. We don't want any war. This bloody comedian, he's sitting there going, please God, I don't know what I've been involved in.
Yeah.
And he is to be disrespected.
I'm in over my head here.
Yeah. And they don't give a shit even about his views. Talk about disrespecting the sovereignty of Ukraine. Like the president is saying, I don't want this. And now Europeans and US are saying, no, you must have it. Open your mouth because we are going to put the medicine in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
With the bookshelf switch sides.
Out,
this global Monroe Doctrine, like if you'd ask these folks, what they would say is, well, we're simply upholding the rules-based international order, that we're the leaders of, and that these Western countries are all part of. And it seems like, when they're the ones that make the rules, this is what they're allowed. But they get to determine who's involved in this rules-based international order and what these rules are and who's following them and who doesn't have to follow them. And it seems a little lopsided sometimes when you look into what this actually constitutes in terms of like geopolitics. The past chat was popping off both in the chat and in the sub goal, obviously. That's kind of interesting. Bit of a downgrade there, almost. Whatever. It's not like I'm counting though, so who cares?
Yesterday
I didn't realize Zelensky said not to send the tanks. Well, Lexi, this is from a year ago. So this was right before the war kicked off. And this was when like Zelensky himself and people in Ukraine were starting to like tell the Americans to like dial down the rhetoric
some guy,
about
Rob
this.
Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Thank you, Dan, for the raid. Thank you, Dan. Hello, Dan. What is up?
You can count on me.
We love it.
And have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Dan. Get in here, Raiders. Thank you for the raid, Dan Simpson. Everyone follow Dan Simpson. How was your stream today? Thanks for joining us. We got VIJAY Prashad himself coming on this stream in 30 minutes. I'm just reviewing some of the conversation that I had with him last year. We had a banger. That's good to know. Just reviewing the conversation that I had with VIJAY Prashad last year, almost a year ago to the day, since he was last on this program.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
So just reviewing some of the things we went over last year before we get to our conversation today in like 30 minutes from now. And thank you so much to 10,000 Sandwiches.
You can count on me. You're
for the 3 gifted subs
to talk you through all this.
Hi everyone.
Thank you, Part Ian, for the gifted sub. Very much appreciated. And thank you also, Ben Bang Boom 10 for the sub. 14 months of tier 1 from Ben Bang Boom 10. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Spent a good amount of time interviewing Philip Luther. Philip Luther is for the last 20 years been a very important person in Amnesty International. He is now currently one of the leaders of their Middle East North Africa section. I interviewed Philip about the report, 280-page report that Amnesty has produced on apartheid that Israel has been conducting against the Palestinian people. It's an amazing report, by the way. You should read it. 280-page report. Okay. This is all entirely grounded in international law. They go over the definition of apartheid, the definitions of crimes against humanity in the Rome Statute, genocide, and so on. It's hugely rooted in international law and agreements that countries have signed. It's a super report over here. Immediately, the foreign minister of Israel tweets out, he says, name is Mr. Lapid, he tweets out, says that Amnesty International is quoted sources who are terrorist organizations. Wow. Really interesting tweet, okay? US ambassador to Israel tweeted out saying it's an absurd that they use the word apartheid. Nobody takes the US seriously on this. But the Israeli foreign minister's tweet was impressive. He said they have quoted the words of terrorist organizations. So who are the terrorist organizations? I asked Philip Luther directly. This is on tape and it's available at People's Dispatch. Philip answered the following. He said, well, actually, Mr. Lapid's statement proves the point of the report. Last year, Israel decided that 6 human rights organizations, Palestinian are terrorist organizations. So this is how the apartheid functions. You just delegitimize the politics. Having established that Palestinian human rights organizations are terrorist organizations, when their reports are used by Amnesty in its report, they can dismiss the report saying it quotes terrorist organizations. People are thinking, oh my God, they're quoting Hamas or whatever. No, they're quoting Palestinian human rights organizations, which you have illegally called and you shut them down on the grounds that they are terrorist organizations. So here's the information warfare and how it functions. How words are twisted around. They'll
This
have
is
no
not
meaning
today.
at the end of it. Your adversaries become terrorists and so on. Israelis demonstrated right now with Lapid's statement, but the United States is the chief of this, the real heroes of all this. Villains become heroes become villains. Neo-fascists in Ukraine become allies. The United States super worried about authoritarianism in Russia, so they want to block Russian natural gas from going to Germany. How will they substitute it? Let's get it from the great democracies of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and so on.
Yes.
It's weird. They twist words around and then they leave you completely confused and demoralized. Don't understand what the hell is going on. Suddenly Qatari gas is supposed to be democratic and Russian gas is supposed to be authoritarian. So weird, and we let them get away with it. That's the real criminal thing.
Well, they get away with that, and also I think they get away with downplaying their own role in creating these exact circumstances in the first place. This is the important shit as well. Putin is a great example of that. You can push back against what you see as propaganda about this Ukraine and Russia conflict. And there's this whole meme, of course, in Western press and in the United States and Canada about Putin bad. And we have to sanction Russia, and we have to increase security and increase hostility because of Putin. And they don't examine their own role in creating the exact circumstance that leads to someone like Putin becoming leader of Russia in the first place, which was a situation that was 100%, almost entirely created by the United States and by the U.S. interference in Russia and the collapse of the Soviet Union and the coup with Yeltsin in the 90s. Did Rob get younger? So this interview, this interview took place 5 years from now, and we're just watching. We're using Twitch's new Tachyon based video portal in order to view future me talking about things from the past for some reason. It looks so fit. It's generally just the camera and the lighting and the fact that I shaved. That's really all it is. I'm still very out of shape. Don't worry about that. Inability to look inward and look in a mirror and examine how the new flux capacitor feature. These exact circumstances that they're now using to justify more hostility and more intervention.
Well, talking about
this is so fascinating. This part,
there was no greater boozer than Boris Yeltsin. Such a great boozer. Talk about your beverages interest. Such a great boozer that he, at one time, you can go onto the great junkyard of YouTube and you'll find a video that probably hasn't been looked at in years of Yeltsin falling off the stage while speaking. So drunk he was. The United States totally humiliated the Russians after the collapse of the USSR. Totally humiliated. The Chinese suffered 100 years of humiliation from the 1820s, start of the British period, then the 2 Opium Wars and so on, all the way out to the Chinese Revolution. 100 years the Chinese experienced what they call the century of humiliation. Well, the Russians experienced like 20 years of humiliation from 1991 till about roughly, let's say 10 years of humiliation. And along comes Putin. Putin was the creature of that humiliation because he emerges and says, listen, Russian people, we are not going to stand for this anymore. This boozed up puppet Yeltsin does whatever Clinton tells him to do and so on. We're not going to stand for this. We're going to stand upright and we're going to revive first the great Russian empires of Catherine the Great and God knows who else. Then now he's absorbed some parts of the Soviet history and so on. He says, we will be a proud nation. Well, it's exactly what you're saying. He's a creature not of, some ancient culture in Russia, but he's a creature of those 10 years of humiliation. If they hadn't humiliated the Russians so badly, perhaps this idea that you need to have, your pride restored would not have been so important inside Russian politics today. It's what enabled Putin essentially to just wipe out everybody else because he was effective in saying that I am going to restore our standing in the world. Got to understand Russia, that's the generations that are alive now and in positions of power, they don't necessarily remember the Soviet era, but they remember those 10, 12 years between the fall of the USSR and the arrival of Putin on the scene. And that's really key. You know what you're talking about, the best example is places like Afghanistan and so on. You know, you want to go and fight against the Afghan communists, that's okay. You deal with them politically. No, they armed these wretched people, you know, people like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. He was a student in Kabul University. The CIA, Pakistani intelligence, they armed these terrible people, Buruddin Rabbani, and they send them across the border, or their people across the border, to kill young communists, young liberals who are doing literacy training in Afghanistan. You know, tens of thousands of them went into the countryside after 1978 to train people, make them literate and so on. It's these people who are targeted initially by the so-called Mujahideen, backed by the Saudis, the Pakistani dictatorship of Zia-ul Haq, and the United States CIA. And I mean, I had a great chat before he died with Chuck Cogan, who was the director of operations in this area. And Chuck was pretty straightforward. You know, we went after the nastiest people. We sent them over the border and so on. Real nasty people, completely. Well, this is the people that then create the chaos in Afghanistan that become the Taliban. And suddenly you're like, well, where did the Taliban come from? Certainly not from Afghan society by itself. You tip the scales on their behalf in the 1970s and 80s. That's the origin of the crisis in Afghanistan. It's not like the Taliban come from some ancient, you know, Afghan story. Not at all. They are a creature of the Saudis, the Pakistanis, and the United States. But as you say, it will never be openly, you know, frankly admitted. Even though ex-CIA officials, man, they are completely honest when you meet them when they are old.
Yeah. They have nothing to hide anymore. Well, and that's like what you're saying. That's the really amazing thing about this current moment with Russia and Ukraine as well. When you have, you know, the United States government and the Canadian government openly arming and funding these like fascist militias,
You can count
and even
on me.
openly
You're gonna have
discussing
good old
plans.
I've
to
been
if
saying
there is
this.
some kind of invasion. We're going to train these rebels to commit acts of terrorism.
I've been saying
in
this
order to destabilize our enemy, which is Russia. And it's just like, how many times do you have to continually try this exact same strategy? And you
Thank
just
you,
see the
Dimitri,
same
for the
people
gifted sub.
openly encouraging it again. We all know where this always leads, and you just
Yes,
still
we
see
do.
people going down this path, and it's truly amazing. You see it being completely whitewashed and normalized in Western media, and it makes you feel crazy when you know this basic history. It makes you feel insane to watch this getting repeated time and time again, with zero pushback. And in fact, anyone that does push back is then, as you say, delegitimized. You're called a Putin apologist.
Fortunately,
or
that's stopped
a
now.
Taliban apologist.
Fortunately,
or
that's toned down
Other examples
a
of
little bit.
Saddam Hussein apologist or an Assadist or whatever. Anyone that asks these critical questions gets delegitimized like that. And this exact strategy just continues happening over and over again with the exact same disastrous results for everybody.
No, they take you out, man. I mean, look, firstly, they make you feel crazy, okay? That's the first thing that happens. You start thinking, God, how is it? See, let's be clear. The United States has a government. The government meets and makes policy. They have international allies. They also meet among like-minded people and make policy. When the US War Cabinet makes policy, it's a conspiracy. I mean, a small number of people have decided to do something. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do know that small numbers of people make catastrophic policy that has enormous impact on the world. Case in point, the invasion of Iraq. Small number of people decided to do that, not a huge number of people. Yes, sections of the government agreed to go along with it. You know, in 2019, the US Army released a massive book called The US Army in Iraq, which nobody has read. Within the first few pages of this text, the US Army's own document, again, not read by very many people, this document itself says that we just didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't understand Iraq. We didn't know Iraq. There were not enough experts. We had no clue. And, this has got to be a learning lesson for the future. Okay? Now, I've read this text, but I've read the same thing said in the the Pentagon Papers that were leaked by Daniel Ellsberg. Pentagon Papers, what do they say? We don't know enough about Vietnam. We didn't learn. We didn't understand the thing. We should never repeat these mistakes. I mean, have people forgotten and not reading at all? Okay, so put these two things together. You have small number of people, we call them a ruling class. They disregard history, they disregard facts, they do whatever the hell they want. They behave as Chomsky and I write. We've got a book coming out this year called The Withdrawal. In it, we basically say United States ruling class operates like the Godfather. They do whatever the hell they want. They don't give a damn about international law. They don't care about history. They don't care about the, impact in the world. You say things like that, people say you're nuts. You're like a conspiracy theorist, whatever. Look, go back and read the Pentagon Papers. You will see how they escalated the use of US troops in Vietnam. Small number of people in Washington decided, let's send experts, let's send more troops. By which time it's a fait accompli. Then suddenly the public is told, defend the troops. You've got to stand with the troops. But you had no role in sending people to Vietnam in the first place. But when push comes to shove, you have to go and stand and wave the flag and defend the troops.
I probably should have finished the book last night, and I did not.
The US public didn't vote for that Iraq war, okay?
But
there was no vote. Millions of people protested against it. Small number of people, Rumsfeld and Cheney and others, they say, let's do it. Let's go and invade. An illegal war, as the UN called it, the United Nations. Then they escalate, they start destroying the country. And then they turn around and tell the 300 million odd people in the United States, bring out your flags. You got to support the troops. Thank you for your service. Hey, I didn't vote to send them there, but no, now it's your obligation. Stand with the troops. Anybody criticizes it, conspiracy theorist, out of the mainstream. I mean, it's insane. But this is the grammatical structure that repeats. Vietnam, Iraq, and now, God forbid, Russia, China,
Yeah.
God forbid, because it's annihilation.
Yeah, of course. And that's actually a great segue, because that's one of the things that we talk about a lot often on this show. You mentioned the ability of these kind of like Western imperialist powers, both on a state level and like a media level. Not that there's actually much separation between these two things. This ability to distort information. And one thing that we talk a lot about on this program is this, the kind of increasingly escalating, this like heavily escalating propaganda war, predominantly against China, that's been like really ratcheting up in intensity over the last 4 or 5 years. That I and others have been talking about as the new Cold War, and trying to describe it as something really that we need to push back on and push back against and openly, be against. I'm just wondering, when you talk about this, this increasingly kind of hostile and dangerous situation when it comes to ratcheting up tensions with China, can you just talk about your observations of the last few years as you've seen this narrative kind of continue to be pushed? I mean, you mentioned Iraq. I always bring up this example, the million civilians killed in the Iraq war. We often talk about the 37 million people that were displaced, the refugee crisis that was created by this, as well as creating horrible terrorist groups like ISIS in this process that have led to so much misery and violence. And then as this process of ratcheting up tensions against China has taken place, you have human rights being kind of weaponized and used as an example of why China is this dangerous, authoritarian, dystopian country that we must all hate and fear and we must confront. And you talk about the cognitive dissonance between the country that has been responsible for so much violence and so much devastation and poverty and these major crises, then wielding human rights as an effort to ratchet up tensions with a geopolitical enemy of theirs. So I was just wondering about your observations of the last few years of as this campaign has really picked up steam, and how you've responded to all that.
I'm going to be a little rude now, because I would like to say that as long as people in the rest of the world
I love this part.
like the serfs or the coolies,
don't behave like the serfs,
subordinates of the West, it's okay. If you're a serf, a coolie, a servant, a subordinate, it's okay. As long as China delivered its workers in Shenzhen and other places to Western companies and didn't challenge anything, it was fine. Nobody talked about, human rights and all that shit. Nobody even knew the word Xinjiang or Uyghurs or any of that. Nobody cared about democracy in Hong Kong. Look, the British held Hong Kong for 100 years. They made no democracy there. Okay, it was held as a colonial outpost till 1997. There was no talk about human rights, democracy, nothing. As long as the Chinese said, you can come and make your phones, your plastic buckets, all the shit that you don't want to make at home, make it in Shenzhen, there was no complaint. Clinton, Bush, nobody said a damn thing about human rights. Okay, you got to have a little push and pull. You say, well, we're concerned about freedom of speech and maybe freedom of religion, in China and all of that. Those are marginal things. United States also criticizes Saudi Arabia every year in the state of whatever it is, that religious freedom document. Nobody takes that seriously, that kind of stuff. As long as China was willing to say, come in, use our workers, make your profits, it was fine. But you see, the Chinese had a plan, and the plan had two parts to it. Part number one, in 1820s, the Chinese had one of the most important, biggest economies in the world. Because of that century of humiliation, they actually had a great devastation, and they also had the longest World War II, lasted from 1937 to 1949, 2 years before the war begins in Europe, the Marco Polo Bridge incident, and then it goes on for 4 more years. It's a civil conflict, but still it's a war. Very long, devastating war, enormous areas of the country destroyed and so on. So one of the things that you have to understand about the Chinese Revolution is this commitment to restore China to its place in the world. Mao opens the Chinese Revolution by saying, now we have all stood up. That's what he says at Tiananmen Square in 1949. China now stands up. It was on its knees. We will no longer be subordinate. But it was an extraordinarily poor country. So there's one long-term agenda of restoring the sovereignty of China, territorial sovereignty, social and political sovereignty. That's one aspect. Secondly, in 1978, when Deng Xiaoping opens the country up, he actually makes an interesting bet by the 1990s. 92, he goes and talks to Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, and he makes an interesting bet. What Deng Xiaoping and his group around him say is that, look, we'll allow foreign companies to come in.
Are you going for a thinner mustache look than this year? I mean, I definitely did shave, Doc. Although literally I've been doing more of just the stubble here and down there. But then before I took a shower today, I shaved here. And then I ended up with this kind of thin mustache look that I didn't really intend. I did end up in kind of a John Waters situation. And now it's too late to try and change it. I don't want to go and shave my mustache now. Right before a big interview that I have to do. It's happening in 5 minutes. So I just got to go like this. I just got to run with this.
Utilize a highly skilled labor, well-fed Chinese labor.
Thank you, Doc.
Relatively lack of disease and so on. Unlike India, where the workers are relatively lower literacy levels, less nutrition intake and so on. Chinese labor was
just casually shaving while he's talking.
But these foreign companies have to share their science and technology.
Okay, so anyway, this was a fantastic interview. Definitely a highlight of my career as like an independent journalist, or whatever it is that I do, whatever it is you call me. I don't know what it is. I'm going to close that though for now. Last chance. You got 5 more minutes to subscribe to the channel, folks, if you want to. Then I got to mute the alerts until later. So if you want to subscribe to the channel, you got 5 minutes. After that, you're cut off. You're cut off. Can we get VJ's thoughts on your mustache choices? I don't think he's going to be able to see me because I've never figured out that the way to run Streamlabs through Zoom. There's a way to do it, and I've just never gotten around to it. I mean, I'm definitely going to ask about India, J-Bon. I got some stuff here. I think I got a bunch of stuff to get into here. 1 year later, it's still in the working on it pile. That's right. That's correct. That's how I operate. Listen, I just put the new alert. Okay? I just put the new alert. Don't be mean. Don't be mean to me. Stop being mean to me.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Everyone be on your best behavior. Act normal. No peppies except peepo happy and nodders. No mad emotes.
Thank you, G Cluppy, for the 300 friend coin. And then keeping everyone honest. Keeping everyone honest there. Palki left WION and if they apparently tried to pull a non-compete on her. So I'm sure VJ has things to say about how I can fix her. I'm sure he probably does. Someone rickroll VJ, please. No rickrolling. No one do any rickrolling. Okay? Please. I think we've had more than enough of that. We've had more than enough of that lately. I think we've all had our fill of the hilarious gag. The hilarious japes that come from this community.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Let's go.
Thank you, Dimitri, for the 200 friend coin. Thank you. Okay, what am I doing here? Zoom is there. Okay. Okay. I'm in the waiting room. It's actually his Zoom room and not mine. So any moment now, I'm muting the alerts. So no one can do any of your PPs and poo-poos and whatever it is you want to do. Your Rick rolls or what have you. Does VJ have a Twitch account? I don't think so. I think this community is his first experience that he's had with Twitch. I need better headphones. Don't really like these big honkin' ones. You think it's Fart Party 69? Speaking of PP, I'm going to get the P badge when the month turns over. Once again, though, it has nothing to do with P. Hello. Hello, VJ, you're there.
Bye.
Hello? VJ, I'm hearing some echoing. You got some minor echo. I don't hear anything you're saying. I just hear bye, 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 bye repeatedly. Oh my. Here, VJ, I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave and come back into the room and see if it fixes any of the issues. Okay? I'm going to leave and come right back. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Hey VJ, can you nod if you can hear me? Okay, so I hear nothing from you. I just hear this repeated echo. I'm not sure what is going on with that. Checking into this. Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Oh. Oh no. Oh. My goodness. I'm going to try to join that one more time. VJ, do you hear what I'm hearing right now? Yeah. Here, VJ, I'm gonna email you a Zoom invite right now for another room, and we'll see if that has any impact. Okay, I'm gonna send that email right now. Okay. Yeah, I'll can you hear this? Oh my goodness. Oh my. Oh my gosh. Oh. It's literally the buy though makes it great too, because it's like it's almost like it's intentional. It's almost like it's intentional. Now we'll see if this works. Yeah, I guess I'll just have to join the Discord. Ah, darn. Ah, darn. I guess I'll just have to join the old Discord server. Oh. I don't think that's on my end. Ask if he wants to come to Aliens movie night. Oh, fucking please work. Yeah, VJ, I'm just... Well, I heard a break for a moment. I'm just still hearing an echo. I'm hearing an echo of you saying what sounds like bye over and over and over and over again. And I don't hear a word you're saying. I really don't think it's from me. I'll be very embarrassed if it is. He says I was on a long call just now and there was no problem. Oh. Oh. Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Whatever it was, you just fixed it, VJ.
Yeah, but I didn't do anything.
Really? It seems like you did something there.
I just looked behind my computer to check if it was plugged in, but I didn't do anything. I didn't touch the plug even.
I think the CIA or possibly NATO or one of these intelligence agencies is after us here. They don't want us having this. What sure is to be an explosive conversation.
Computers are strange things. Maybe I just, in moving my body, I changed something. God knows. Anyway, okay. How are you doing? Everything okay?
Yeah, it's going great. It's going great. How are you doing, VJ? I'm so happy to have you back on the program. Thank you for joining us.
So how are you doing the program? I thought you generally use a streaming service. What is the...
We're on Twitch. We're live on twitch.tv right now. I know you're very... Okay. I know last year... So this is about almost a year to the day since the last time we spoke. And I know last time you were kind of like alarmed and maybe had a little trepidation about the weird community that it was pestering you with memes and images.
No, I don't have any problem with that. But how does this Twitch work? Can I keep my camera on?
Yeah, you're on and I can see you. So you just keep that on. And,
okay.
We're broadcasting live right now on twitch.tv/Rob Rousseau.
Okay, fine. You know what you're doing. I just stay here. Okay.
I'm a professional broadcaster over here. That's right. So yeah, thank you again for coming back on the show. It's a real delight to have you back. How have you been doing?
I'm doing fine. It's been a crazy couple of months, really, in a way.
Yes.
Trying to sort out. It's just a lot of things that are complicated, I think, in the world.
Yeah.
And I find myself sometimes a little bewildered by, I guess the way in which people want to think about reality. That bewilders me.
Yeah.
There's a way, the kind of rush to make comments without really studying things, and I find that puzzling. Like for instance, this business in Ukraine now with the German tanks. All the media commentary is about tanks, right? Germany must allow Poland to send tanks. Well, this really interested me a lot because you remember the beginning of the war when Russian tanks entered Ukraine, they were basically wiped out very quickly. And in recent months, the Russians haven't been using a ground operation. They've been hitting Ukraine hard with missiles. So what do the Ukrainians propose to do with the tanks if this is not really a tank battle? And then, but nobody was asking the question, like, is there really a tank confrontation? Will the Leopard tanks be facing Russian tanks or Abrams tanks from the US? Well, the fact is this may have nothing to do with tanks. It might have something to do with using the tanks debate to strong arm Germany into fully backing Ukraine, or whatever. I don't even know what's going on. But all I could tell was that people in the mainstream, story number one, lead story, Russia hammers Ukraine with missiles. Okay, that's story number one. Story number two, Ukraine must have tanks. And I'm thinking, listen, journalists and editors, how is a tank going to deal with a missile? Like, put your two stories together. And I'm not a military expert, I never would presume to be one, but it's super illogical, that you're first reporting there are missile strikes coming in, and missiles, are basically supersonic weapons that for which you need extraordinarily sophisticated means to retaliate, like missile batteries of various kinds by themselves. But a tank that whizzes around, on the countryside, how is that going to deal with, a missile? So I was like, what's going on in the media? Like, basic logical flaws or inconsistencies don't seem to be of concern. There's a debate in Ramstein around the tanks. Well, let's focus on the tanks. Well, weird. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, what you're pointing out of this the issue with kind of mainstream press, especially in the West as well, it's a problem it's a generational problem, but it's something that I think has been there's been a real magnifying glass put on that by the last year of this war in Ukraine. I was actually just watching back our previous conversation, which took place about 3 weeks or so before the invasion kicked off. And it was very fascinating kind of talking about that, and discussing sort of the context about all the discussions that was going on now, and how we were kind of talking about how Ukraine was being led along by these Western powers, and we're kind of trying at that time to tone down the rhetoric a little bit, because they realized that they were potentially going to get involved with something that was going to be very destructive and harmful to the country. So it's been kind of fascinating to look at those comments in the context of the last year. And I think, what you're talking about with the media, I think the thing that what has stuck out for me over the last year of kind of following this conflict, and also just paying close attention to the media coverage of it, is the way that here in the West, I know it's not the same all over the world, but if you're living in one of these Western countries, part of the rules-based international order or what have you, there's been this extremely one-sided view of this conflict, and in terms of like the debate that happens, or in the coverage that happens of this conflict, the only viewpoint that's ever really able to be articulated in any kind of mainstream press is how many weapons go to Ukraine and how much funding and how much training goes to these militias, not whether we should be contributing to this conflict or whether we should be escalating it, but how much, what's the level of escalation that we need. That's been the only viewpoint that's been allowed to be expressed basically in mainstream press now for the last year. Just this endless cheerleading for further escalation of the conflict. And any kind of dissenting viewpoint of that has been completely suppressed from the mainstream press, or maybe sometimes it takes place in far right media, which is another kind of a really alarming thing. But anyone who has suggested, we shouldn't escalate this conflict, anyone who's pointed out, the role that Canada and the United States and these Western countries played in provoking the conflict or talking about this context, has been completely suppressed and completely silenced. And the only room that there's been in terms of this discussion is how much can we escalate and how fast, and how many more weapons and tanks and bombs and missiles can we get to Ukraine. And I think that's probably the most alarming thing about watching this coverage play out and this conflict play out.
I mean, what does one say, honestly? Literally, I'm at a loss, because there are people who at one point 20 odd years ago stood quite strongly against the warmongering in Iraq and so on, very strong anti-war voices of one kind or the other. Now those very voices are cheerleading for more weapons for Ukraine, and let's be frank, this war has to end in a negotiation, because there are only two ways for wars to end. And I would like to see more public discussion about this. One is the radical, complete, total defeat of an adversary. like Nazis were defeated in World War II, and then they were brought to Nuremberg and tried, and some escaped to South America, and some committed suicide and whatever. But they were defeated, roundly defeated. Okay, that's one way in which a war can end. And then the United States kind of used denazification to both promote some Nazis into Western intelligence services, and then sort of, allowed the others to enter into mainstream West German society. Okay, that's one approach, the complete total defeat. Second approach is a kind of negotiation. Okay, and in a negotiation, all sides have to, deal with the fact that they have to live with each other. Okay, total defeat is actually not possible anymore. The West is simply not going to allow Ukraine to experience a total defeat. I think that Polish armies might cross the border and so on. It's a horrifying scenario, but they are simply not going to allow permanent defeat. And by the way, the Germans were not keen on giving Leopard tanks to Ukraine because they didn't want to provoke the ire of the Russians, frankly. And the United States had to come in and say, okay, we'll give 31 Abrams tanks, which was effectively a kind of nuclear umbrella over Germany. That the United States was saying, look, we're coming in this with Germany. So Germany is not alone. So we're going to be there. And that was an insurance policy for Olaf Scholz, also pressure. Okay. So Ukraine is not going to be allowed to be defeated, okay, regardless of what everybody is saying. Secondly, there is no defeat for Russia, in my opinion, okay, because Putin might resign, he might decide to take off, or he might be overthrown, him personally. But rooted in Russian society now is a deep patriotic seam where people simply don't want to return to the humiliations of the 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed. So Russia is not going to permit a defeat, okay? It's not just about Putin. United Russia is a big political party. They have deep roots in the society. So there's going to be no possibility of either Ukraine or Russia facing a total defeat. Okay, if you foreclose that option, total defeat, then you're going to have to deal with the fact that there's going to be a negotiation. Now, unless the United States is prepared to use its incredibly, 1970s technology from Star Trek and dig a trench around Ukraine and bring its giant helicopters and lift up the entire Ukrainian territory and move it to Iowa, unless the US is prepared to do that, the Ukrainians are going to have to live next to the Russians. That's just a reality of geography. Ukraine cannot build a giant wall that, is not going to allow it to deal with the Russians. It's just not going to happen. Ukrainians are going to have to deal with the Russians. They are not moving to Iowa. And besides, if all Ukrainians move to Iowa, there'd be an enormous anti-Ukrainian sentiment in the United States, which is prone to anti-immigrant sentiment, and that to Slavic immigrants. Let's not forget that Slavic immigrants, well, that's at a different level. You see, the whole Brexit debate in Britain was about Polish migrants to Britain. That was all the cliches that abounded, So Ukraine is going to have to deal with the Russians. And right now, the West effectively is basically telling Ukraine, don't negotiate with the Russians. Don't deal with the Russians. But this is terrible for Ukraine's people and for Ukraine's history to come. It is far better for Ukraine now. And I'm not saying concessions, surrender. I'm saying negotiate. Far better, negotiate. And, look, frankly, what are the issues that the Russians put on the table at Minsk II? And now we know from Angela Merkel, now we know from Francois Hollande that the West was using Minsk II as a way to just drag out time and
they're just buying time.
Ukraine buying time. I mean, they said it, I'm not saying it. I'm just quoting from them, they said it. Okay, fine. But still, what were the issues the Russians raised? Number one, Donetsk, Lugansk, in other words, the Donbass region has a significant Russian majority population. They were seeking autonomy. At the time of Minsk, there was no conversation about Lugansk and Donetsk joining Russia. It was merely the Russians were seeking autonomy for the Russian-speaking population, Russian ethnic population inside Ukraine. Secondly, Crimea had already come and joined Russia. But there was a real problem, which is that the Ukrainian government stopped allowing water to be supplied to Crimea. So the Russians built at great expense a bridge to send the water by tanker. One of the demands in Minsk 2 was restart the water. If not, and this is what the Russians did, they built that land bridge through Mariupol. Okay, so look, there are bits and pieces here for a negotiated settlement. I doubt that Donbass is going to return to Ukraine. Okay, that's gone. The Ukrainians are going to have to sign that off. I very much doubt that the Russians will withdraw from Mariupol without a permanent guarantee of water supply to Crimea, and that Crimea's, accession into Russia is basically accepted by Ukraine. I mean, these are the basic negotiating points. Zelensky knows, because he was elected on a peace campaign, that he's going to have to negotiate, but he has bought the fantasy that has been sold to him by the Boris Johnsons, by the Bidens. I mean, these mediocre Western warrior state politicians, extraordinarily mediocre people. Biden, the guy can't string, and by the way, it's not true that Biden can't string sentences together because he's an elderly man. It's not true. Biden couldn't string sentences together when he was a young man. Go back and listen to tape of Biden at the Anita Hill hearing. He struggles to put sentences together. This is the mediocrity of Western warrior state so-called democratic leaders. Boris Johnson, good God, man. But Zelensky basically was hornswaggled, a good old-fashioned hard scrabble word from the US prairies. They hornscrabbled Zelensky into this mentality that you can win, you can prevail. I mean, he's wearing camouflage t-shirts that are one size too small for him. What kind of business is this? This is not good for the Ukrainian people. I'm not saying that the Russians are doing anything heroic. I'm not getting into that whole debate, I'm just talking practicalities. What's the out? The out is there's nobody going to win. And secondly, you're going to have to negotiate. You got to negotiate in good faith. Otherwise, it's not going to last for another generation.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk about this idea of total defeat, which has been sold as the only possible solution that's for Ukrainians and their supporters. Not only the total defeat of Russia in this invasion, but also getting Russia out of Crimea, which just seems to be completely so far away from anything resembling reality that it's just, I don't know how you can expect to have a genuine, sincere conversation about how this conflict should be managed and how it should end if that's what the starting point is for a lot of these folks in the sort of imperialist camp or the Western camp. I mean, that's just completely fantasy land, the idea that that's going to be a possibility. But there's a lot of people that are just maintaining that that's the only possible outcome for this. And many comfortable Western journalists as well that have made caring about Ukraine and Ukrainian sovereignty and democracy their main sort of like political cause that they believe in are very adamant about this. But again, these are people that don't have to live in these regions that are just undergoing this struggle and the bombings and the destruction that the folks that are living there now are living under. It's very kind of sad to see this conversation play out in our media and in our journalism, and to have anyone advocating for an actual settlement or a dialogue like you are, be kind of totally marginalized in our media or in our discourse.
Look, frankly, I'm in favor of, and I'm not a peacenik in that sense, but I'm in favor of all negotiations everywhere. I would like to see immediate negotiations for Yemen, where the situation is catastrophic. I mean, we need the end to the war in Yemen, but British arms manufacturers like, BAE Systems making lots of money selling arms to the Saudis to pummel the Yemenis. US arms manufacturers making lots of money, to sell weapons to parties that are then transferring it to Ukraine. By the way, the United States, in the middle of military exercises with Israel, Juniper Oak military exercise, while this massacre takes place in Jenin, and then the US asking Israel, because, I don't know if people know this well, but the United States warehouses a ton of weapons in Israel. It's a way, part of that $38 billion military aid package. United States warehouse. So the US has asked Israel to basically ship, out of date weapons to Ukraine so that the Israeli arsenal can get new weapons, in its place so they can pummel the Palestinians. Again, last night, the Israelis bombed Gaza again after the massacre of 10 people, 9 in Jenin and 1 in Al Ram, just north of Jerusalem. I mean, there is a way in which the arms industry is benefiting greatly from, the prolongation of these wars. I'm in favor of all these wars being negotiated down because they're all political conflicts that require political settlements. I mean, look, the other war that needs to be negotiated is the war between the Israelis. It's not even a war. It's actually a UN designated occupation. But the occupation of the Palestinians, then there needs to be some way out. I mean, we need, again, a kind of global conference of finding a way out. What's happening in Mozambique, what's happening in Cameroon, where hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced in a conflict around French-speaking Cameroon and English-speaking Cameroon, and then every few days somebody's killed on the Nigeria-Cameroon border. All this stuff is completely, obscured by the singular focus on Ukraine. All the other conflicts that need negotiation, they need the presence of, serious parties to lead them in negotiation. I mean, that's one thing, is that rather than provide space for negotiation, those who ask for it pilloried as agents of God knows what. The other day, somebody is calling me a Duganist. I said, look, I don't know anything about Duganism. I've been a Marxist my whole life, almost, as far as I remember. I don't need any new ideology now. I'm quite okay with Marxism. So, you don't need to impute something on me. You want to know what I believe? Ask me what I believe. I'll tell you, I'm a Marxist. This assessment comes from my understanding of Marxism. Don't throw Putin is, Duganist, Xi Jinping is, all this stuff at me. I have my own opinions. You can write what you want with a Sharpie on my body, but I'll shower it off. It doesn't impact me. It's not a permanent marker, I can tell you that. So the point is that we who call for negotiations can be called whatever, but the fact of the matter is, you don't negotiate, the arms industry benefits. You don't negotiate, people get hurt. You don't negotiate, the very people that you claim to be speaking in the name of are getting their lives damaged for generations. I covered the war in Iraq. I know how bad these things are, how intergenerational the trauma is. I find a lot of these people are kind of long distance warriors. They want somebody else to fight their fights. They will wear camouflage, but send somebody else to die.
Yeah.
There was an old Pink Floyd song about this, which I very much like, about, people who send other people to do their fighting. And Roger, who wrote the song, wrote it about people like George W. Bush and so on, who sent young working class people from the United States to fight in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and so on, for wars that they would never go to fight themselves or send their own children to fight in. So yes, I would call for peace in this conflict and in others, because the price of continuing this war is just not acceptable for the planet.
No, it's not acceptable for the planet, but as you're pointing out, it's great for all the weapons manufacturers that are making a killing with the endless arms transfers going to Ukraine. They don't even know who they're going to half the time, and that doesn't seem to be a problem for them. And I think like what the point of what we're talking about here is as well is that for I think a lot of the Western imperialists who have like helped provoke this conflict in a deliberate effort to destabilize Russia, who's their geopolitical enemy, even though they talk about total defeat of Russia while simultaneously knowing that's not really a possibility because they want it to be an endless quagmire for the Russian government. Like they don't actually care about the people of Ukraine that actually live in this environment. Quagmires like we saw in Afghanistan, like we saw in Vietnam and elsewhere, that's great business for the American arms manufacturers that are pumping weapons into this country. And I think another thing, like you're pointing out as well, I think it's important to mention also that a lot of the belligerence with which the West has sort of treated Russia, both in the past and like the way that this conflict has been promoted from people in the West and supported, has actually empowered a lot of really reactionary elements, undercurrents in Russian society, like you were talking about. Like there's this whole much even more chauvinistic, nationalistic kind of sect in Russian society that view Putin as going too soft on Ukraine, and it's empowering the absolute worst people on both sides of the conflict. The longer it goes on, and the longer this quagmire continues. But again, it's great business for the arms manufacturers and all these massive corporations now that are talking about getting involved in the rebuilding effort. BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and all these multinationals that Zelensky is now kind of appealing to.
I mean, to me, let's focus on this a little bit, because to me, what's extraordinary is the willingness of the Europeans to sacrifice their project to the United States. That's incredible. Like, for instance, after World War II, the European project, which eventually became, the customs union, and then would become the European Economic Community, and then the European Union, and so on. This project was supposed to bring in a bunch of European countries to create, maybe common trading platforms, and also eventually a common foreign policy. That was part of the deal. In fact, now the European Union has a kind of foreign policy leader. She's useless, but there's a supposed independent foreign policy. Well, when all this was happening, only one country actually said, look, frankly, one country in Western Europe said, frankly, we're not that keen on this, European project, because it seems like a Trojan horse for US power. So the whole European Economic Community is a little bit like NATO, which looks like it's European, North Atlantic Treaty Organization based in Brussels, but effectively it's a Trojan horse for the US. And that country was France, led by Charles de Gaulle, which is why a phrase developed called Gaullist foreign policy, where the French said, we want our own foreign policy. We want our own weapons industry, Rafale jet fighters and so on. We want to create our own military. And they also had pretensions of colonial glory and holding, they were in the middle of trying to maintain their empire in Vietnam and Algeria. They were getting pummeled by people. Anyway, this Gaullist idea was there. So in Europe, there's been a debate whether Europe should be effectively the Trojan horse of the United States or should develop its own policies. There was an idea of create a European arms industry. Well, that was created. A lot of weapon systems created. There was a European aircraft manufacturing company that made the Airbus. That was a European consortium and so on. Well, the US in the last 15 years has attempted to subordinate Europe. Any ambition of Europe to have independence has to be crushed. Europe in the last 15 years started to develop very close ties with China and with Russia. Russian gas and energy coming in. And the US was frustrated about this. A lot of what's going on now is the attempt to break Europe from Russia and China, bring Europe back to its subordinate status to the United States, and ensure that these traditions of Gaullism and so on are marginalized. Look, I know that if you raise this issue, somebody will say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. But I just want to encourage people to think of something. Russia, as a consequence of the terribly stupid US NATO wars against, Iraq, Iran, and Libya, Russia became a major energy supplier to Europe. Well, in order to provide energy to Europe, they felt, look, we're going to have to build pipelines. So they built pipelines through Poland, Ukraine, whatever. And these governments started to say, oh, we want more of the profit or from the natural gas that passes through our land. So the Russians, in collaboration with the Germans and various private companies, built Nord Stream 2. They built a pipeline through the northern seas to come from Russia directly into Germany. Well, okay, it's a normal pipeline. There are pipelines all over the world, okay? It's not unusual. Nord Stream 2 was not like some great feat. It's a normal pipeline under the water bringing natural gas. Okay, Mr. Trump, when he was president, goes to NATO headquarters, yells at them and says that, you're wasting billions of dollars buying natural gas from Russia, and then you expect us to protect you from Russia. That's a direct quote from Trump, by the way. So the US has been furious about Nord Stream for a long time. During this war, Biden was asked in a press conference,
Yeah.
what do you think about Nord Stream? And he says, no, we're going to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And then the journalist very sincerely asked him, what do you mean? And he said, no, we're going to get rid of it. Okay, Victoria Nuland then comes before the House Senate Foreign Relations. By the way, she was the woman in the Maidan who was on the phone saying, let's get rid of blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, Yats is our guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, and then she comes before the US Congress and she says, well, Nord Stream, we're going to take care of it. We're going to take care of it. And then Nord Stream is blown up in passive voice. It disappears. Okay. And then
Crazy.
Vicky
Coincidence.
Clark, yeah, coincidence. Victoria Nuland comes back to the Senate and, says, she quotes, I think it was Ted Cruz or some other really ridiculous politician and says, well, as you say, Senator, that is now a hunk of metal at the bottom of a sea. And it has been taken care of, she says in passive voice. Now, I am not saying that the United States torpedoed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I am not saying that for the record. I am saying
saying it, but yeah, you can continue.
I am saying the following for the record. How is it that a major energy pipeline is blown up in the middle of a conflict and there is no investigation by any government of how
I thought they were
this
looking into
pipeline
it.
blew up?
I thought they were really looking into it. At any moment now, their investigation is going to be
looking into anything. And frankly, the Russians haven't made too much noise about it either, which is like, man, their propaganda is really pathetic in that sense. Like, why aren't you raising this question at the United Nations? The question should be raised that do our pipelines open game in a war? Like, can submarines go around the world blowing up pipelines? Is that acceptable behavior? Or is there going to be an international treaty to prevent this? Or just for the record, should we not establish what happened here? But no. Has the New York Times asked the question? No. Washington Post? No. The execrable Guardian? No. CNN? No. MSNBC, which shrieks and screams about everything? No. Has even Democracy Now! Asked that question? No. Nobody seems to care. A pipeline is blown up and nobody cares. Now, Rob, the reason I'm saying to you that I don't even need to know who did it is it's not relevant who actually blew it up. What's really revealing is that none of these countries care who did it, which means that everybody really knows who did it. And everybody knows who did it because in public, Vicky Nuland says it was done. And before that, Biden said, we'll handle it. Who talks like that? We'll handle it. That's like mafia language.
Yeah.
We'll take care of it.
It'd be a damn shame if something happened to your pipeline. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like my favorite movie, Godfather 1. Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes. When Vicky Nuland comes there and says, it's a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea, it was a lot like Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes. That was Vicky Nuland's line to Ted Cruz. It's a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea. That's it. Case closed. What kind of planet are we living on? What country is the United States? What's happened to journalism? Okay, what's happened to journalism? What a ridiculous thing to say. Okay, I'm old enough and I was there in Iraq when a lot of this stuff happened. But, the New York Times wrote a bunch of lies in their paper under the byline of Judith Miller. She lied about weapons of mass destruction. She lied about a ton of stuff. End of the day, the New York Times got rid of Judith Miller. They probably gave her a good payout. She probably has some sort of platform somewhere. I haven't heard about her for a long time. But the New York Times didn't have any repercussions. They didn't need to do a full investigation. Now, why I'm saying this, there was an editor of the New York Times who hired a young black journalist who apparently made up stories that he published in the New York Times. He apparently went and talked to people that didn't exist. And he wrote stories about race relations in the US. He made up stories. When he was found out, the editor was fired of the New York Times, and there was a multiple full-page story analysis of how his lies were able to get through the sophisticated editing standards of the newspaper on record. But when Judy Miller lied about a war that led to over 1 million people dead, she was let go, fair, but there was no public assessment of what damage she had caused in the New York Times and so on and so forth. So I don't have high expectations for the New York Times. I just want to put that out there.
Well, many of the journalists that supported and
it's
promoted
pretty
the Iraq,
incredible. Yeah.
many of the journalists that supported and promoted the Iraq war just failed upwards and were heavily rewarded for that, you know, rather than facing any consequences for it. Interesting.
I mean,
how
it was
works.
an illegal war. It was illegal by the standards of the United Nations.
Yeah.
You know, so now when, US officials, high officials say things like, well, the United States, we've never seen a war, illegal war like this. Okay, I've heard this many times, including from Condoleezza Rice, says on US television, never seen anything like this. What?
It's really unbelievable, I know.
I mean, Minister Rice, you were the National Security Advisor. You were there. You guys conducted what Kofi Annan, General Secretary of the UN, called an illegal war in Iraq. How can you and then these, journalists who are interviewing them don't interrupt, don't ask any questions. They don't say, but what about Iraq? And, the reason they don't say that is, listen to what I said. What about Iraq? Because then they get accused of whataboutery, and whataboutery, we know, is actually a propaganda device created by British intelligence against the Irish Republican Army in the 1980s. So, I mean, it's a completely comatose media. I get it. It's a comatose media. Nonetheless, a pipeline, to return to where I started on this, is destroyed and nobody seems to want to discuss it. And if you raise the question, then you get hit with the cliche, you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, I'm not even proposing a conspiracy. I'm merely asking you a question. How did that pipeline get blown up?
Well,
but you don't want to talk about it. How is that a conspiracy theory? I'm merely raising a question.
Well,
what's the answer, friend?
Yeah. The ultimate irony is that the people that hurl around the conspiracy theorist epithet at people are the ones that speculating that Russia is the one that bombed their own pipeline for whatever labyrinthine reason, and can never really quite explain that. But yeah, they don't qualify as this being shunted into this conspiracy theorist camp. And I think, in what you're talking about, and what I think we need to discuss, which is the primary contradiction as usual, which is imperialism. And I think when you describe this process of European countries such as France and Germany kind of going against their own interests at the behest of the U.S. State Department, that's a demonstration of the country that wields the imperialist power in the world. As much as people have tried to use this kind of like Marxist language to side with NATO and accuse Russia of imperialism, it's not just about invading a country, but it's forcing these countries to commit economic suicide at their behest, or to back their proxy war in Ukraine, even though it's going to destroy their own access to cheap energy. It's getting countries like France and Germany off of that Russian gas and onto fracked gas from the United States at a significantly marked up price, which is going to be devastating to the actual people that have to live there and pay for the energy prices. And I think when we see that process playing out, and also the ways that, the United States primarily in the Western countries control these flows of information, these massive media corporations to control this narrative, we're seeing, in real time, an example of like who's wielding imperialist power in the world. And it's not quite as simple as just saying, well, if you invade a country, it's imperialism. We're seeing who wields the imperialist power, and it's not Russia in this case.
I mean, what you say is absolutely true. Okay, there is a powerful country smashing other countries into submission. Okay, but let's look at these other countries just as an exercise. I was in Glasgow at the COP26 meeting, the meeting on climate change. Okay, at Glasgow, Europeans, including Biden, when he was not asleep, were chastising India and China for burning coal. Not only India and China, the whole global South, for using coal, but with much lower carbon footprint per capita than any Western country. I mean, the United States continues to be, despite all this personal recycling and all this stuff, US continues to be the major per capita carbon footprint in the world. And on top of that, and worse than that, the Pentagon is the world's largest institutional polluter. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, all of that. But they were yelling at the global South countries, you're using coal, you're disgusting, whatever. Meanwhile, in Germany, the great Green Party of Germany, which emerged in an environmental platform, that's why they are called Green Party. Now with this war, firstly, they have become the great warmongers. Even during the war in Afghanistan, they became the biggest warmongers, at the time. Anyway, this war, the Greens are to the right of even the Christian Democrats on this war. And the Green Party is perfectly happy with Germany perhaps restarting its nuclear plants. I mean, start your coal-fired plants again. For God's sake, while you're at it, burn down the whole damn Black Forest, for all I care. Because you are hypocrites. Yesterday, you were yelling at everybody saying, got to save the planet, this, that, and the other. Today, as you're quite rightly say, you're willing to import US fracked natural gas, which has been liquefied. Okay, so the enormous energy footprint of liquefying already disgustingly produced natural gas with impact on Native American lands and so on, aka Standing Rock, let's remember that, all of that. And then you got to ship it across the Atlantic. That's another part of the carbon footprint. Then you've got to bring it back to the gaseous state in Hamburg or wherever, and then pipe it into homes. It's much more expensive, but also greater carbon footprint. Okay, it's grotesque. So you're the Greens, self-righteous Green Party that was lecturing everybody. Now you're willing to burn down the Black Forest effectively to continue a ludicrous war against the Russians. Frankly, people around the world, on the continents of Africa and so on, are laughing at these people. They're laughing at them because it's not only the hypocrisy, it's the stupidity. These are stupid people. Look, the United States tried to intervene. The community of Latin American and Caribbean states, CELAC, met in Buenos Aires this week. It's a big meeting because Lula brought Brazil back into CELAC and he was the leader, the hero of the hour and so on. He went to meet Pepe Mujica and they sat in Mujica's little bug and so on. It's an incredible meeting happening. What was the US intervention? Okay, I don't know if people saw this. United States Southern Command, which is the military wing of US imperialism in the Americas, put out a message to its friendly countries in South America, like Peru, which is a coup country, and told them, send weapons to Ukraine. So the US is trying to use the send your weapons to Ukraine as a way of getting their allies on side. Because they don't have any other project for the people. They don't have money. They don't have investment that they're willing to do. They don't want to transfer technology. They can just browbeat people and say, why don't you fly the Ukrainian flag and you've got to send your weapons to help Ukraine. People in most of the world listen to that and go, are you crazy? I mean, why are we going to get involved in that conflict? We want to make trade deals with the United States and with China and with Russia. We don't want to get involved in your great power dynamics that you're imposing on the world. It's an interesting situation, Rob. I mean, right now, many countries around the world looking at this situation, they're like, wow, man, Green Party in Europe. I mean, what are these people, and the animosity against, and maybe people don't use the word imperialism, but the animosity against Western arrogance is now at a high level, not only in China, where there's a new revival of animosity towards Western arrogance, which had not been there 10 years ago. 10 years ago, in Chinese intellectual circles, there was a real pro-American bias. That has disappeared. That has evaporated. In India, where just a few years ago, huge pro-American bias among the middle class, evaporating. Why? Because people are like, we don't want to be bullied around. I talked about Glasgow. At Glasgow, I gave an intervention. And I used two concepts, colonial mentality and colonial structure. And that little clip of a speech went viral all over the world, but in India as well. And in India, it was circulating in right-wing WhatsApp groups. The Prime Minister of India, who's a bloody fascist guy, quoted my speech. His foreign minister quoted it. And they now use the term colonial mentality and colonial structure. For me, it's very weird because, I'm a completely different part of the political spectrum than Narendra Modi. I think he's a fascist. I'm, a Marxist. But they took those phrases, colonial mentality, colonial structure, and they, pushed it forward. And so they are representing, in a way, this change in the mood in India, which is similar to the change in the mood on the African continent and so on. People in the United States, Canada, whatever, need to wake up to the fact that the continents of Latin America, Asia, they are experiencing a new kind of political and intellectual transformation. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't want to exaggerate it, but you can feel this in the air. There is a change of mood. Where it goes, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, just to your point, I think we talked about the media and the very one-sided portrayal of this conflict, and the way that our media figures and political figures here in the middle of the empire, the heart of the empire, create this illusion of consensus about Ukraine. The whole world stands with Ukraine, and using this kind of rhetoric while completely ignoring the feel like these are all just the former colonialist countries, essentially, when they say the whole world, right? And completely ignoring the entirety of the global South, which is much more neutral on it, and in some cases, like a lot more sympathetic to Russia, and completely kind of ignoring that context. And I think that's one thing that's been very interesting to notice, especially when you bring up India, is the way that this shift is happening. And that not only do you have, these formerly colonized countries in Latin America or elsewhere or Africa, taking a neutral stance on this, but you even have like very reactionary, usually dependable Western allies such as India or even Saudi Arabia that are kind of hedging on this a little more, and they're not backing the United States even when they're being demanded to do so. And it's really indicative of this shift right now in global power, this shift away from this unipolar US-led world order to more of a multipolarity world. And that's, I think, seeing specifically these very reactionary places in terms of their governments, like India and Saudi Arabia, refusing to back the US on this, is such a prime example of it. And I mean, just talking about China as well, and the burgeoning sort of anti-US sort of school of thought there, that's not hard to understand either when you see the way that American politicians and people in the media and powerful interests are kind of trying to provoke a conflict using Taiwan in the exact same way they've used Ukraine to destabilize Russia. That there's a powerful thirst amongst these imperialists to create another proxy war against China and to use Taiwan to destabilize China. And the interesting thing is that we've seen, despite the provocations, and you see like with the visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, China has kind of refused to take the bait, and they've refused to rise to these provocations in the same way that Russia did. But I mean, it feels a little bit like it's only a matter of when until eventually the imperialists provoke the kind of conflict that they're attempting to with Taiwan. And it's not surprising that anti-US sentiment is rising in China as a result of these kind of provocations.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that China is not rising to the provocation, because I want to say something about the current discussion about multipolarity. You see, I very much agree that the age of unipolarity is over. But what comes after unipolarity? Let's take the case of what's happening in the African continent. United States has done a full court press. Blinken went there. Lloyd Austin went there. Now Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, is doing a tour. They're basically all telling African countries, don't deal with the Russians, don't deal with the Chinese. That's what they're saying, pretty openly.
They're coming with the lectures.
Pardon?
They're coming with the lectures.
Yeah, they are with the lectures. China's foreign minister, Qing'an, first overseas trip was to Africa. He went to about 5 to 8 countries: Gabon, Benin, Egypt, Ethiopia, and so on. In Ethiopia, he inaugurated the African Center for Disease Control, which was basically built with Chinese support. At that period, he gave a very interesting speech. And he said, you know, the relationship of powers like China to Africa should not be one of confrontation. We don't want to have confrontation with the West around China. We don't want China to be, Africa. We don't want Africa to be the battleground of a proxy war between the United States. What the African countries need collaboration. And he talked about healthcare and the so-called health Silk Road as a way forward. In my reading, the Chinese, the Russians, the Brazilians, the Indians, and so on, they don't want to set up alternative poles. They don't want that. They want a multilateral system. They want the United Nations and its structures to operate democratically. The Chinese don't want to establish a Chinese pole, because what they say is, and I agree with them, that multipolarity leads to war. You need more global cooperation. You don't want the situation like World War One. The British Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Tsarist Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, and then they sort of all mobilize and go to war with each other as they create different alliances and so on. What the Chinese have said openly, repeatedly, and Qin Gang says it as well when he got brought into the foreign ministry. He used to be the Chinese ambassador to the US. They don't want to be a pole. They want to live in a system of multilateral institutions that mediate conflicts among regions and countries. What I learned in my travels to many of these countries is that people want to establish regional institutions. CELAC for Latin America, Shanghai Cooperation Organization for Asia, strengthen the African Union, and so on. Regional organizations, building up the importance of multilateralism. I mean, that's why China even joined the group of friends in defense of the UN Charter. It's a body of a group of countries that have come together inside the UN, saying, let's strengthen multilateralism and the UN Charter. So I think we are entering into an interesting period. I think it's too quick to say, it's going from unipolarity, and to use the word polarity both times. Unipolarity to multipolarity. No. It's going from unipolarity to regionalism, with a great interest in strengthening multilateral systems like the UN, maybe like BRICS as well, and so on, which is a multilateral international body, but not establish competing poles, competition, Cold Wars, and all that. Neither Russia nor China have indicated an interest in reviving or getting involved in a US imposed new Cold War on the planet.
Well, I definitely don't doubt that China and Russia want to try to avoid that conflict and want to try to avoid becoming this pole opposite U.S. hegemony. But the question is, and I think if you've studied U.S. history, as I know you have with your book Washington Bullets, which I received as a Christmas gift this year, and I was very thankful to get it.
Wow. Okay.
But the question is whether the United States is just going to sit idly back while these new regional institutions are formed, and such as BRICS and such as this new competing sort of economic order. Even if these countries are engaging in a completely productive way and in a non-antagonistic way, the U.S. views these kinds of shifts as a direct threat to their hegemony over controlling the entire global financial system and encircling the globe with their military bases, etc. As much as these intentions might be good, my concern, and I think the concern for a lot of people that are watching these forces kind of play out, is that regardless of the good intentions, the United States is going to take these kind of shifts as being provocations and respond to it with increasing belligerence and violence. The more powerful these forces become. Is that a concern of yours as well?
Well, look, I wrote a book called The Darker Nations about 15 years ago. A new edition has just come out, in which it's basically about the development of non-alignment, the Bandung spirit and all that. The United States refused to accept the concept of non-alignment. They called it neutralism. the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles in the lead, running the CIA and the State Department. It's scandalous that Washington, D.C. has 2 airports named after scoundrels, one after the Dulles brothers and the other after Ronald Reagan. I mean, what about a Malcolm X International Airport or something? That's something to aspire to. Anyway, the United States refused to accept non-alignment, and that's why they went on a hardcore exercise of cooing governments, Lumumba 61, the government of Goulart, which is not even a left government, in Brazil in 64, the government Sukarno 65, all the way out to Chile 73 and so on. They just wouldn't accept non-alignment. I mean, most of these were not communist governments. Goulart was not a communist. Arbenz in Guatemala was not a communist. Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, not a communist. They simply wanted to develop a non-aligned posture, not allowed. So I agree with you. I'm not naive about this. Any country today that simply says, look, we want a multilateral future, Venezuela, whack them. We want a multilateral future, Cuba, whack them. We want a multilateral future, Brazil, whack it, get rid of Lula. I mean, this attitude in DC is there. That is why the rest of the world needs to have a big movement inside the United States that at least sends, 20, 30 people moderately, slightly to the left of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, maybe not slightly, but quite a bit to her left.
Yeah, we can go further.
20, 30 of them need to go to Washington. There needs to be, a fifth column there that's preventing the United States from essentially doing this kind of mischief around the world, okay? No country coups governments as much as the US. And look at bloody Elon Musk, we'll coup anybody we want. I mean, Elon, for God's sake, man. I mean, I know you're a playful, funny guy because Elon on his own Twitter account wrote state affiliated media. So I immediately asked him on Twitter, which state are you affiliated with? A lot of people wrote pretty funny things like state of denial and state of this or whatever.
The deep state.
But the fact is that he did speak the truth when he said, we'll coup anybody we want, because that's the attitude of the US oligarchy, of the let's call it what they are, okay? Of the not the plutocracy. What is the nice word they use in Russia to describe billionaires? Very interesting word. They call them oligarchs. Only Russia, it seems, has oligarchs. Elon Musk, these people are not called oligarchs. So let's start calling them oligarchs. The Western oligarchs, for instance, Bezos, Musk, and so on, this is their attitude. We don't like it, we're going to whack you. It's the attitude, I mean, they behave effectively. They effectively behave like mafia bosses. We just don't like it, you're gone. I mean, that attitude has to be suffocated. And the only way to suffocate that attitude is politically inside countries like the United States, where US allies also say, we're not interested in this behavior anymore. We're going to have to live on a planet. Look, Australia, largest trading partner, China. Australia totally reliant on China. Yet Australia behaves like a lily pad for US power and ambitions. The Australian ruling class has to be put on notice by the Australian people. It's ridiculous, ludicrous behavior. They're going to now base B-1 and B-52 bombers in northern Australia to threaten China. I mean, as if the Australian people need this kind of tension. You want to start a conflict with China at that level? It was one thing to have like a Scott Morrison, who really is a moronic. I mean, I have to say this again, Rob. The word mediocre doesn't even describe people like Rob Morrison, Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden. I mean, these people are completely zero. They have no depth at all.
Yes,
they are
they are.
manufactured by a public relations company. I mean, okay, maybe Joe Biden is a really bad product of a public relations company, but Justin Trudeau, I mean, how often can you get away with just flicking your hair and pretending to look cute and get through the day?
Have you seen his socks, though? They're really something else.
Well, did you see him getting scolded by Xi Jinping?
That was wonderful. Yeah, I loved that.
That was interesting, boss. That was interesting because there you got to see the character and caliber of world leaders. I mean, she comes from a history The guy was sent to the countryside. He lived in a rural area. The guy then becomes, manages entire provinces. People don't understand this. When they say China is authoritarian, I ask them, how much do you really know about China? For instance, who does the real governing in China? Well, the Communist Party, Xi Jinping. You don't know anything. The real governing in China happens at the provincial level. Provincial governors are the most powerful people in terms of the setting of provincial policy. Now, the policy is set by the Politburo of a Communist Party that's 96 million members, are involved in that party. And please, if you ever say, well, they're all robots, you've never met a Chinese Communist Party member, because you put 5 of them in the room and there are 12 opinions. So, people who have a racist idea of China never talk to real Chinese people, let alone Chinese people in their government or in their Communist Party. Their opinions to me are worth nothing. But let's just stick with this for a second. Xi Jinping is trained out of that tradition. The guy he wasn't just the prime minister of his country because his pop was the prime minister, okay? I mean, pop being prime minister, you are prime minister. What is Justin Trudeau's curriculum vitae? My pop was the prime minister. What was Biden's curriculum vitae? He was the senator from Delaware, which is, hardly like, okay, I don't want to insult the people of Delaware, but they kept electing him. I don't know for what. And then eventually Obama picked him to be his vice president after several attempts at being president and losing, principally because I think Obama felt I need a tall white man on the ticket. I don't know why. But then
also has a history of extremely reactionary political actions that he's taken, so I can appeal to these kind of white moderates that I need to build and put in my coalition.
Yeah, but there's nothing there. The guy is empty. I mean, what comes out of him? Nothing. That's Biden. I mean, I mentioned Trudeau. Scott Morrison of Australia was at another level. I mean, literally an empty suit, who said really stupid things. Unnecessarily started saying that, China has deliberately created COVID-19. Oh my God, dude, and suddenly you are not a conspiracy theorist for saying something as odd duck and stupid as that. I mean, just because you're the Prime Minister of Australia doesn't immunize you from being charged with stupid conspiracy mongering, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and on that point too, that whole conversation with Xi Jinping and Justin Trudeau was over reporting in Canadian media that China was like interfering in our political system or whatever, and then leaks about that those conversations that were taking place appearing in our media, and Xi Jinping saying like, "What the fuck is this? Why are you? What this is not professional. Like, how are we supposed to have a discussion when you're leaking everything to the press?" And then Trudeau immediately walked back all his comments, which I thought was very funny and an example of like who is wielding this kind of global power and who's kind of pretending to wield it.
And not only that, do you remember how Trudeau turned around from the conversation?
Yeah, he kind of slunk away.
Yeah, he looked completely lost. And then and even his aide didn't come with him.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny, man. He was betrayed by his aide.
Yeah. That was very good. No, but you pointed out, I mean, it's like, let's talk about colonial mentality. We have so much, how Canadians feel comfortable, getting out the finger wagging lectures and talking about China and what they're doing. When you're talking, like you're pointing out, there's by a large margin, there's more people in the Chinese Communist Party than there are people living in this country. But we still feel the need to lecture them about what they should or shouldn't do. It's absolutely preposterous that we think we have any leg to stand on when we're talking, talking to people in this country. That is
so interesting. I hadn't thought about that. That there are as many or more people in the Communist Party in China than there are in Canada. And meanwhile, I want to just point out a role that Canada has played recently that's very alarming.
Please do.
There are 8 countries that border the Arctic Circle. In fact, not just border, 8 countries that have an Arctic presence. Canada is one of them. Russia is another. In the 1990s, concerned about pollution in the Arctic, the 8 Arctic countries got together and created the Arctic Council. Canada played a role in this, in forming the Arctic Council. They meet periodically, they have conversations about, mining in the Arctic, pollution in the Arctic, declining Arctic ice, militarism in the Arctic, and so on. It's actually a really important multilateral body to have mutual information sharing, and it sets some boundaries, but there's a lot of information sharing. Okay, United States is part of this because of Alaska, but also United States has a large military base in Greenland, which is a colony of Denmark. Don't forget that it's still colonized territory of the Danish kingdom. Anyway, the war breaks out in Ukraine, and Canada leads a rebellion in the Arctic Council, saying we will not come to the Arctic Council meetings if Russia is there, and essentially scuttles the Arctic Council. Now, why is this scuttling of the Arctic Council so significant? With retreating sea ice, more military bases are being built there, and it is discovered that there are almost trillions of dollars worth of rare earth minerals, oil, natural gas, and so on up there. United States was mining some of it, the Russians have been mining some of it, and so on. The fact that Canada broke a multilateral body, for no reason. And by the way, since Finland and Sweden are joining NATO, the other 7 members of the Arctic Council will all be NATO members. So they have made the Arctic a confrontation between NATO and Russia. When again, as people who live in the planet, we need to be collaborating about how to protect the Arctic, not use it as a new battlefield to posture and fight for territory and conduct so-called freedom of navigation exercises and so on. So there's Canada, supposedly the sort of liberal face of North America, essentially pulling the curtains down on the Arctic Council, which was merely a place to have a conversation about what's happening in the Arctic. They said, we will not sit at the table with Russia. I mean, juvenile, and dangerous, both juvenile and dangerous.
Yeah. Well, as I often say, Canada is basically a junior partner in the global imperialist project. We're seeing elements of it there. And Canada has been deeply implicated in Ukraine, to circle back to that as well. Canada has been deeply implicated in creating this kind of like right-wing Ukrainian nationalist Banderite kind of identity, and propagating the idea that that's what Ukraine is, and that's what it always was and always will be, and kind of helping to completely obliterate what remained of the long tradition of Ukrainian socialism and Ukraine's important role as a country in the USSR. And Canada has been deeply implicated in that. That's why we have monuments in Canada to Waffen SS divisions of people that helped carry out the Holocaust. That's what.
Tell me about this. I mean, I know you have a foreign minister who, has some relatives from the Banderites thing, and she's been denying it and so on. But tell me about these statues. I have no idea about this.
I would be happy to. Yeah. Well, first of all, Freeland, who you're talking about, the deputy prime minister, her grandfather, Michael Chomiak, was a fascist sympathizer from Ukraine, living in fascist occupied Poland during World War II. And it was kind of his lifelong project to kind of rehabilitate these anti-Soviet Ukrainian nationalists, such as Bandera, who helped carry out the Holocaust and perpetuate this kind of double genocide theory about the Soviet Union and the Nazis. And after World War II, this is a really interesting story that I've learned over the last couple of years, which is that prior to the war, Canada's largest socialist newspaper was written in Ukrainian. And we had this very socialistic Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. And then after World War II, Canada deliberately imported scores of these former SS members and Ukrainian far-right nationalists, brought them into the country like legally in our immigration system, partially to just disrupt this kind of socialistic Ukrainian diaspora, also to act as muscle in these like anti-union movements. And as a result, Canada has this incredibly large one, I think the largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world. And we literally have monuments that have been erected to these Waffen SS divisions. There's been a lot of controversy in this country as people have started to pay attention to this and one ask these basic questions. I thought we were against the Nazis. Why do we have monuments to SS divisions in this country? But we do, and Canada's played a large role in that process of rehabilitating these kinds of nationalistic anti-Soviet figures, and has used the World War II and used the fact that Canadian troops have very bravely and correctly fought against fascism in World War II to suggest that we're our ruling class is against it as well. but we've been a central figure globally in kind of rehabilitating fascism and rehabilitating these specific groups of Ukrainian nationalists. So that's one of the reasons Canada has been, in this conflict, one of the leading cheerleaders for it, because that's been a central part of our post-war project in terms of our rehabilitation of these Ukrainian anti-Soviet figures. Very disturbing.
Wow, that's very, very interesting. So I have often thought about why Canada is sort of runs in the lead on some of these issues. It's not always the case. Like, for instance, in Venezuela, it was easy to see why Canada was even doing a worse politics than the United States from when Chavez first won the election. Well, that had a lot to do with, the mining companies, particularly Barrick Gold, which was led by the great intellectual of the mining companies, Mr. Monk. And, what's his name? Peter Monk or something. Monk was like the leader of the mining establishment. And he wrote an article in the Canadian papers calling for the overthrow of Chavez, calling him authoritarian after Chavez had overseen 3 elections already, for a Constitution Assembly, for his own election in 1999 and so on. I mean, I understood that. That was clear, right? That was directly about the mining companies in Canada. But this has bewildered me. So thanks a lot. That was super interesting.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. It's been an eye-opening for me as someone that kind of grew up in this society and maybe believed a lot of the kind of propaganda that we get taught about in Canada as being the kind of polite, kind, Western country that's post-racial and all this nonsense that we tell ourselves. Deeply, deeply reactionary country, and it's kind of hidden under this surface of civility. And it's been eye-opening for me to learn about this, and that's why I think when the conflict started with Russia and Ukraine, I was a little bit more equipped to understand the context of it, because I had been learning about this kind of stuff, and I knew that Canada in the around the 2015 after the Maidan was Canadian intelligence were arming and training these fascist militias in eastern Ukraine, which is something that, as a socialist, a Marxist, I am against sending weapons to these open white supremacists and Nazis. Apparently, this has become like a controversial thing for some reason in our culture, but I was against that when I learned about it, and I think that provided me a little bit more context and a little bit more understanding when this conflict really began. And Canada's role in creating the situation and provoking it.
Wow. I mean, that's mind-blowing. Now, Rob, I have to leave you in like 5 minutes, if that's okay.
That's great. No, it's been wonderful to have you back on the show. I don't want to keep you too much longer. Before you go, VJ, I just had one final question for you, which is, have you seen the film Avatar: The Way of Water? Have you got a chance to catch that yet? And if you have, follow-up question, if you have, do you think Ho Chi Minh would have been a fan of this film?
Okay, so I'm generally an enormous fan of mainstream cinema. That's for one. Secondly, I did go and see the Black Panther movie, and I gave a talk in New York right after, and I upset a lot of people because I gave the game away, as it were, for that film. So I vowed to take a vow of silence, not to talk about films, unless I get hired by somebody to be a professional film critic and get training in how not to give the game away. So
you were correctly described Black Panther as being imperialist propaganda, as I remember, and I agree with
did say that it's an extraordinarily well-made film and highly entertaining. But I also gave the game away.
Yeah.
And so I refuse to say whether I've seen or not seen the film. But I will say that Ho Chi Minh, given the kind of life he led, didn't get a chance to see many films. His only enjoyment in life, well, I shouldn't say only. I don't want to talk about the other enjoyments that I know yet. But his principal diversion in life was smoking cigarettes. And he smoked a lot. And his favorite cigarette was Lucky Strikes, which is a US cigarette. And he used to tell people, look, bring me Lucky Strikes. And he would say, my only concession to the United States is that they make the best cigarettes. And I have often thought about that and felt, wow, that's a sophisticated. He's getting bombed by the United States, and he says they make some really good cigarettes. I would like to say there's a lot of things. I have a list of things that the US does well. I'm not going to say what my list is, but there's a list of things. I'm sophisticated enough to say that US imperialism is an abomination. But my goodness, there's a lot of things that they do well. Well, one of them, in my opinion, is excellent rock and roll music. And I'm an enormous fan of punk rock and rock and roll in general, including rock and roll that other people might find boring. I find quite elevating.
Yeah, like Steely Dan,
And
for instance.
Steely Dan, exactly. We had that in common. But when I was young, I liked a lot of US punk rock. The Dicks, for instance, a terrific band. The punk rock music from California that I really liked. Yola Tango, things like that. So yes, in the line of Ho Chi Minh, I would say Ho Chi Minh loved American cigarettes. He didn't get to watch many films, and I am certainly not going to offer an opinion on Avatar #2.
Okay, well, if you haven't seen it, I recommend you go check it out. I think you might enjoy it. Maybe we can privately have a discussion about this, so you don't get canceled. But VIJAY, thank you again.
Please cancel me. If you cancel me, I'll have a vacation.
Yeah, you won't have to do this anymore. No, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Thank you so much, VIJAY. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you again. Thank you for joining us on the program. We'll do it in another year. I'll reach out to you and we'll have your annual visit.
Anytime, just write and we'll fix it and I'll come back and we'll have fun together. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for teaching me about Canadian fascism.
It was my pleasure. My pleasure. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, folks. Red wine terroirist, and
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
and calm like a tom. Thank both of you so much for the extremely generous 10 gifted subs at the beginning of that conversation.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Thank you so much.
Wow. Okay, Rob. Seriously, wow.
Oh my.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Oh my goodness. So thank you also to Comrade Social Distancing for the 2 gifted subs. Thank you so much, Comrade Social Distancing, for all your support. Thank you also to Gen X Bushy for the 10 gifted subs. Jesus Christ, Gen X Bushy. Thank you so much for that. Very kind of you. Thank you, James, for the gifted sub as well. And thank you, M. Gauntlet, also the 5 gifted subs. Look at the unbelievable level of generosity here. Thank you so much, folks. I can tell you appreciated that talk with VIJAY. I had a wonderful time.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Goodness. Oh my goodness gracious. Christine, thank you for the 5 gifted subs. Thank you so much, Christine.
You can count on
Very,
me.
very
You're going to
kind
have
of
good
you.
old Rob to talk you through all this.
Unbelievable levels of generosity happening right now. And thank you, GMO Radio, also for the gifted sub. Thank you, GMO Radio. Goodness gracious. What a wonderful community. That was such a great conversation. I just enjoyed that so much. I'm glad I took those notes prior to him joining. I'm sure it would have been fine, but I felt good about that. right? I felt pretty good about that one. I think that was a totally worthy sequel to the original.
You can count on me. You're gonna have
The
good
original
old
talk we
Rob
had
to talk you through
last
all
year.
this.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
Thank you, Doc Hollywood, our friend Doc. Thank you for the gifted sub, Doc. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And thanks to CDXX for the 100 friend coin. I'll absolutely post it to YouTube. I will post it to YouTube. And please, folks, if you're you can
count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Doc, for gifting us up to user Wow Rob. Thank you. If you're new to the community, folks, if you're just joining us, if this is your first time catching this stream, I would also say, please hit the follow button. If you enjoyed this conversation and this discourse, this is what we talk about.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Day in and day out on this program. So if you enjoyed the conversation with VIJAY, please hit the follow button. And this show is on every day: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, starting at noon Eastern. So please join us again for future editions of TRRS. It'd be great to have you. There's a merch sale also going on right now. As I see the merch command being used in the chat. Wrestle chat on Wednesdays, of course. Yeah. We got a brand new merch design close to dropping. And that's one thing I'm going to follow up with VIJAY. I'm going to get his address and I'm going to send him a complimentary Friendship Triangle reunion at the Ryugyong Hotel t-shirt. I know he's a big t-shirt guy. And also, if you're just joining the community, please join the Discord server. Join the old Discord server, which you can do by clicking on the link in the chat as well. Really, really great community over on Discord. We watched Alien the other night together as part of our now recurring movie night event in the TRRS Discord server. We're also, as Sin Chalice pointing out, reading Red Star Over the Third World right now in the TRRS Discord book club. VIJAY would appreciate that watching Joshi wrestling on Thursdays is praxis. I'm sure that he would. I'm sure that he would. We've got Doc Hollywood's keynote for Carmine scheduled as well. Lots of wonderful stuff going on in the Discord server, so please join that. We got 1 minute left. Close to beating the last record from these hype trains. And I know it's weird, people being very generous. I totally not obligated to contribute more, but I'm just pointing that out as well.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Jeremiah, for the 14 months tier 1 as well. Thank you very much. That was such a great conversation with VIJAY. Such a fun guy to talk to. Very enjoyable. It was so cool. It was really cool to be able to talk to him about...
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Canadian fascism as well. That felt kind of cool, being able to tell VIJAY about that. Thank you, Cool Jay, for the gifted sub. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Getting the lowdown on the SS statues. Exactly, yeah. Thank you, Carrier Wave. Thank you. I appreciate your continued support, Carrier Wave. Thanks. I'm just gonna take a brief moment here just to stretch my legs. I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll come back. We'll do another 30 minutes of chit chat, and then I'll say goodbye for the weekend. But don't go anywhere. I'm just gonna go for just a brief moment here. I'll come back. We'll hang out a little bit more, and then We'll say goodbye. Okay? So just hang out a few moments. I'll just be gone for like a minute. Maybe 5. Closer to 5. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. I'm back. Hello. I'm back. So what even do we do next? Where do you go from there? You know? Where do you go from there? I don't even know. I think we should just lay back with a cigar. I just tried to use my vape and it was out of battery. Very unfortunate. That was really great stuff. For sure I've got a lot of potential for good clips to put on, like, you know, the socials, TikTok and all that stuff. All that jazz. Saw some anti-Stalin discourse. I did as well on Electable Airwaves. That's why I was Stalin posting. I was Stalin posting on Maine today. God help me. And I was really not expecting that people to like see this tweet. I thought I could get away with a sneaky Stalin post. And it somehow got a lot of likes. But I posted our guy, one of the heroes, one of the intellectual heroes of this stream. Georgian Stalinist grandpa. I proudly display not one but 2 Stalin busts. I should get one too. I would like to get some Stalin books as well. Yeah, I was not expecting people to see this tweet, but it's like, oh well, I might as well just be honest with people, right? Might as well just be honest about what people are signing up for when they look at my posts.
Stalini, figli Damianico.
No.
Però san dacho samda. Shem babua.
No. Is he knibble the hole? No.
That's so good. God, every time when I see wide Stalin, it just kills me. It's so good. I've watched this clip so many times, and it gets me every single time. I laugh every single time. God damn. I don't know who made this. I don't know. It's a good question. I'm not sure. Look at his face, too. His face is great there. What a Chad. What an absolute Chad. I'd like to adopt a Stalin defending grandpa, or a Stalinist babushka as well. Really, Georgian Stalinist grandpa and Soviet Stalinist babushka are like the two basically intellectual heroes of this stream. You know, there are others as well, but those are the ones that we go back to time and time again. What a tag team! I know. How do you dare suggest that they're not to be respected and idolized? How could you ever disagree with this? Couldn't be me. Could not be me. Now, if anyone's watching, from VIJAY, VIJAY is going to be smeared with the TRRS radicalism now. I'm pretty sure he's okay with it. This is funny, the BBC getting mad at another Stalinist babushka. Oh, chat, there's actually something else that I wanted to share with you. And like this this video is a little spicy. I saw this, last night, and I thought it would be really great to share with you. I think it might be against Twitch's TOS, frankly, on this subject, but I'm just going to post it in the chat. I really encourage anyone to check this out as well if you're interested in this subject, because I watched this last night and I just couldn't stop laughing. It's really hilarious. And Twitch is not going to like it, but I'm just going to put it in the chat right now. You can check it out at your own volition. You know? You really should watch that, though, because it's really good stuff. How the tables have turned. Oh, how the tables have turned. You all thought it was pretty goddamn funny, didn't you? You all thought it was pretty goddamn funny. Well, guess who's laughing now, chat? Guess who's laughing now, asshole? Two can play at that game. Two can play at that game, chat. Trickster Rob, being his impish self as usual. I thought I used the specter of the babushkas to lull you into a false sense of security. Oh boy. Oh my goodness. How long have you been planning this? I actually just thought of it right now, frankly. I had not been planning it whatsoever. On a more serious note, though, this is something that I do think, just in relation to all the different conversations that we were just having, I think this is also a clip that we should probably take a look at.
Dress up as the
Tommy, tell us how you put the skits together.
We don't do skits, Mom. Skits are when the football players dress up as the cheerleaders and think it's wit. Sketches are when some of the best minds in comedy come together and put on a national television show that's watched and talked about by millions of people.
Don't you talk to your mother like that.
I'm trying to tell you, you're standing in the middle of the Paris Opera House of American television.
Well, that's swell, Tom, but your little brother is standing in the middle of Afghanistan.
Tommy, tell us.
Yeah. So, really makes you think. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Oh my goodness. We're in all the hits. We're playing all the classic hits. All the classic memes and japes. The classic TRRS japes. Oh man, that was such a great conversation with VJ Prashad. You know what? Like I said, there's nowhere really to even go from there. So, you know, why even try? Why even try? It's Friday. It's Friday evening. Maybe we should all just go enjoy our weekend. Maybe we should do that. You know? How does that sound? I think it sounds pretty good to me. Thanks again, Lodane, for the pre-show and the raid. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in for the conversation with VJ. It was really enjoyable. I was really happy to be able to do that again. Thanks to everyone who contributed as well to the stream. I really appreciate the support, folks. I really do. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Both just the people that come and hang out here and the folks that are able to so generously contribute to this stream and allow it to stay on the air, to bring this kind of content to Twitch. Very cool, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you. So the question is, you know what? Our friend Starlight just started to stream. Let's go ahead and raid our favorite knife-wielding Polish man. I know we all have a lot of knife-wielding Polish friends, but this is definitely my favorite of all of them. Oh, thanks, Old Dutch. Yeah, obviously, like, prioritize like your more important work, but I'll be looking out for when we get the official design ready for that. Really looking forward to dropping that. And yeah, it would be really cool to see VJ wearing one. It would be very cool. So what's today? It's Friday, right? Yeah, so I'll be back on Monday. All right. Enjoy your weekend. I'm going to go hang out with my son and my partner and eat some pizza and watch a movie now. I'm looking forward to that. Friday night pizza night, one of my favorite nights. In terms of nights, it's really up there as one of the best. So I'm going to do that. And I hope you all have a great evening. If you have a good like Friday evening meal or delivery, please post it in food chat in the Discord and we can all talk about that, all our various meals. I'll be back on Monday for a new edition of TRRS. Until then, take care. Thanks, folks. Goodbye.